huge developments with regards to a war really now between Bibi Netanyahu of Israel and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. Schumer had suggested in comments that we'll show you a portion of in a moment that there should be a new government in Israel, really condemning Bibi and citing him directly as an obstacle to peace. Bibi did not take too kindly to this, but he was pressed on those comments on CNN over the weekend. Let's take a listen to this exchange.
That's what I really want to focus on here is Senator Schumer not calling to sort of topple the government, but specifically says, when the war winds down, will you commit to calling new elections? That's my question. Will you?
Dana, 2/3, first of all, what you said is wrong. The vast majority of Israelis oppose early elections until the war doesn't end. We've just had many polls on that. Look, a lot of the polls are twisted.
Channel 12 says, Channel 12 says 64% of Israelis support early elections.
But all polls show that's not. No, I'm afraid that they asked them the question, do you support it during the war? And they said no.
But that's not what Schumer is calling for. He's calling for new elections when the war winds down.
Well, we'll see when we win the war. And until we win the war, I think Israelis understand that if we were to have elections now, before the war is won, resoundingly won, we would have at least 6 months of national paralysis, which means we would lose the war. If we don't win the war, we lose the war. And that would be not only a defeat for Israel, but a defeat for America, too, because our victory is your victory. We're fighting these barbarians that are not merely threatening the survival of Israel,
when the war winds down.
Everything that we hold dear together.
Will you commit to new elections when the war winds down?
I think that's something for the Israeli public to decide.
And the reason why the world is shifting in public sentiment is the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Organizations call what they are seeing near famine in Gaza. So why won't you allow more food trucks to drive through the border crossings into Gaza to feed starving civilians while you continue to take out the terrorists in Hamas?
Well, our policy is to do exactly that. And in fact, we've enabled, our policy is to not to have famine, but to have the entry of humanitarian support as needed and as much as is needed.
He is such an incredible liar there in that last part. I mean, we've seen that babies and young children are literally starving to death. The toll, as we know, is now in the dozens. We know there are aid trucks lined up. We know even standard Democratic senators like Chris Van Hollen are calling out Israel for blocking aid. And also, by the way, Van Hollen, just in some pretty noteworthy comments, said it was absolute nonsense, the attacks on UNRWA, which is the primary aid organization on the ground. But to get back to the Schumer comments, let me play you a little bit of what Chuck Schumer had said on the floor in what was a very lengthy speech. And then I'll react to what he said and to Bibi's response to that. Let's take a listen to Chuck Schumer.
5 months into this conflict, it is clear that Israelis need to take stock of the situation and ask, must we change course? At this critical juncture, I believe a new election is the only way to allow for a healthy and open decision-making process about the future of Israel. At a time when so many Israelis have lost their confidence in the vision and direction of their government. I also believe a majority of the Israeli public will recognize the need for change. And I believe that holding a new election, once the war starts to wind down, would give Israelis an opportunity to express their vision for the post-war future. Of course, the United States cannot dictate the outcome of an election, nor should we try. That is for the Israeli public to decide.
So, Saagar, on the one hand, it's very noteworthy for Chuck Schumer. I believe he is the most powerful Jewish person in D.C., elected official in D.C., longtime, staunch, pro-Israel. You know, he even was against the Obama nuclear deal, for example. Right. He didn't criticize Bibi when Bibi came and gave that speech over the objections of Democrats, sort of undermining the Obama administration with regard to the Iranian nuclear deal. So it is no doubt extraordinarily noteworthy for him to come out so directly against Bibi to cite him as a primary obstacle to peace, to call for new elections after the war. That is a significant and noteworthy shift from Chuck Schumer that I think both reflects the horror of the undeniable humanitarian crisis that is unfolding, and in particular, the massive political pressure that has been applied to Democrats, to the Biden administration, and also the fact that, listen, a majority of Jewish Americans want a ceasefire. An overwhelming majority of Israelis do want Netanyahu gone and think very poorly of him. On the other hand, it continues to be very convenient for Biden and Schumer and other liberal Zionists to just point to Netanyahu like, oh, the problem is just, a few bad apples. And if we just got a, more quote unquote moderate government in there, everything would be better, everything would be different. It's also very convenient to just give a speech rather than using the incredible, tools of policy, money, and diplomatic leverage in order to actually compel different behavior from the Israeli government. The last thing that I'll say here is, in some ways, I'm curious your thoughts on this, Saagar. In some ways, this really plays into Bibi's hands because even his, potential opposition, Benny Gantz, distanced himself from these comments because he can go out there and say what he did to Dana Bash, even though, we laugh at the idea that Israel doesn't try to meddle in our politics. But hey, we're a sovereign country. Like, who are you to tell us what we need to do and how we need to run our government and to meddle in our domestic political affairs? So those are some of my thoughts. What was your reaction?
Yeah, I actually think that, well, first of all, yeah, I think you're correct in terms of the domestic side. In terms of whether this is actually going to change anything, no. What exactly is happening? Nothing in terms of actual effect on the Netanyahu government in terms of change of policy. That said, in Tel Aviv, I would hope that this actually is a wake-up call. Let's put this up there on the screen, for example. Barak Ravid reporting from Israel, quote, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer's speech calling for a new government landed like an earthquake, delivering a huge shock to the already tense U.S.-Israel relationship. He says specifically and points to the fact that since Schumer is understood in Israel as one of the great friends of the country, that for him to call for a change in government was seismic. But what you pointed to is very important about Gantz as well, distancing himself from the comments, and former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett as well, is that the fact is that they are all trying to preserve their ability to operate in a way that they, whatever they want, with U.S. backing. So they're rhetorically trying to shift to this idea of like, hey, how dare you tell us what to do? And it's like, well, if we gave you no money, then maybe you would have a point. But whenever we're the guarantor of your security and have been now for decades, and we sell you the vast majority of your weapons, and where was Iron Dome invented actually? Oh, right, okay. Well, then no, it is a little bit different, and maybe we can and we should tell you what to do. That's kind of where I take issue with where it is politically. I think you're right. I think this will become the mainstream position of the Democratic Party, is like, well, Bibi himself has to go. I do want to say, it's not like a change in government. I'm not saying everything would change, but I think some things would change. I think if Gantz was, for example, I've said this before, I do think a ceasefire would be more likely because you wouldn't necessarily have the same political incentive that Bibi does to have the war going. I think that actually, perhaps most importantly for our purposes, the idea of an expanded war in Lebanon would at least be likely dramatically reduced because there is no direct political incentive, at least, to continue the war after any operations in Gaza. So I wouldn't say that there aren't very, very big substantive changes that would come as a result. And the problem, though, is that if we still ultimately are not going to reach for any leverage, then you can rhetorically be against the Bibi government, but you'll still support the Bibi government, and he's not going to voluntarily resign anytime soon. If anything, the longer that this goes, the better off it is for him. And that dynamic, I don't know that there is much we can do about that without actually conditioning and changing aid. And when both Schumer and Biden have said that that's off the table, then the de facto policy is basically the same one as Trump, where we just support the government.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I don't want to say that nothing would change if you had Benny Gantz running the government. You'd probably have a different coalition. As you said, may not include Ben-Gvir or Smotrich, some of the most, absolute genocidal psychomaniacs that exist. But we also have to reckon with the fact that this war and the way that it has been prosecuted in all of its horror and brutality is very popular domestically in Israel. Bibi's not popular. When he tries to act like he is and like people want him to be there and they don't want elections, that's a lie. And Dana Bash did a good job of catching him in that particular lie, both in saying, you're misquoting what Schumer or misunderstanding what Schumer was saying, because he specifically said after the war, and also you're, misrepresenting what the people of your own country want, because there is an overwhelming majority that wants new elections after the war is through. And there's a good number that want those elections to occur now. But it's not because they think the war has been too brutal. There is some dissent with regard to prioritizing, quote unquote, destroying Hamas, which we know is impossible and is, fanciful and was always wishful thinking from the beginning, and the release of the hostages. So there are tensions there. And perhaps if you had a Gantz who was in charge of the government, had a different coalition, he would be more sympathetic to the hostage families and their allies who prioritize a ceasefire in order to obtain the release of the hostages over continuing the absolute annihilation of the Gaza Strip. But what these comments don't reckon with is, number one, the fact that we have massive power that we're choosing not to use, instead just using these, rhetorical flourishes or these leaks to the press or whatever to signal our displeasure while not actually doing anything about it. And number two, the fact that, domestically in Israel, the war, the prosecution of the war, the brutality of the war, the complete annihilation, we know the numbers. It is overwhelmingly popular. So to just pin the way this has gone down on Bibi and his right-wing government, it's very convenient. And I think it allows Democrats a talking point to posture like they care about the humanitarian crisis and they really care about what's happening to civilians in Gaza, while not actually doing anything that will change the results.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.